Rise of the Guardians is a 2012 American three-dimensional computer-animated fantasy adventure film that was produced by DreamWorks Animation and distributed by Paramount Pictures, marking the final DreamWorks Animation production to be released under Paramount before the studio moved to a distribution partnership with 20th Century Fox. The film was made in the United States and stands as one of the most ambitious and visually ornate animated projects DreamWorks Animation had undertaken up to that point, built around a story that reimagines the most beloved childhood folklore figures as a secret league of guardians who protect the world's children. The film draws its foundation from William Joyce's book series called The Guardians of Childhood, along with his related short film concept The Man in the Moon, and it was brought to the screen through a screenplay written by David Lindsay Abaire. The director behind the project was Peter Ramsey, who took on Rise of the Guardians as his feature directorial debut, and the film also benefited from the involvement of Guillermo del Toro and William Joyce themselves as executive producers, which gave the project a distinctive blend of fantastical world-building and emotional storytelling. Acclaimed cinematographer Roger Deakins served as a visual consultant on the film, lending his expertise in lighting and atmosphere to the animation style, while the musical score was composed by Alexander Desplat, whose sweeping orchestral work helped elevate the film's sense of wonder and danger throughout. The story of Rise of the Guardians is set in a world where the legendary figure's children grow up believing in truth, immortal guardians who exist to protect the innocence, wonder, hope, and dreams of every child on Earth. Santa Claus, known in the film as North, leads this secret order alongside the Tooth Fairy, who protects children's memories through the teeth she collects, the Easter Bunny, called Bunnymund, who safeguards hope and renewal, and the silent but powerful Sandman, who fills children's dreams with joy and wonder every night. These guardians have long operated in secrecy, watching over the world without being fully seen or known by most children, deriving their strength and their very existence from the belief children hold in them. The balance of this hidden world is shattered when a sinister and ancient spirit known as Pitch Black, also called the Boogeyman, resurfaces after a long absence with the plan to plunge the world into fear and darkness by destroying the very belief that sustains the guardians. Pitch intends to replace hope and wonder with nightmares, using his own dark power to corrupt the Sandman's dreams and turn them into terrifying visions, weakening the guardians and stealing away the faith children have always placed in them. Facing this rising threat, the Man in the Moon, the mysterious and ancient guiding force who first created the Guardians and who has never fully revealed himself, chooses to bring in a new Guardian to help in the fight. That new Guardian is Jack Frost, a free-spirited, mischievous winter spirit who has spent centuries alone and unseen, unable to be noticed or believed in by any child despite his playful influence over frost, snow, and winter fun. Jack Frost has no memory of his life before becoming a spirit, and this mystery of his forgotten past becomes an emotional thread that runs throughout the film. Reluctant and unsure of his place among the older, more established guardians, Jack is nonetheless pulled into the mission when North personally recruits him, believing that Jack's carefree nature and connection to children hides a deeper purpose tied to the coming battle against Pitch. As Pitch begins turning the world's children away from believing in the Guardians one by one, starting with the erosion of belief in the Tooth Fairy, the Guardians realize that their traditional methods of quietly working behind the scenes will not be enough to stop him. The heart of the story follows Jack Frost's journey from an isolated, invisible wanderer to a guardian who finally understands his own worth and his own past. Central to this journey is his friendship with a young boy named Jamie Bennett, one of the last children who still believes deeply in the Guardians even as fear and doubt spread among his friends and around the world. Jamie becomes a symbolic anchor for the Guardians' hope, and it is through Jamie's unwavering belief that Jack begins to understand what it truly means to be seen, to be believed in, and to matter to someone. As Pitch's nightmares spread and children across the world stop believing in the Tooth Fairy, the Sandman, and the other Guardians, the balance of power shifts dangerously in Pitch's favor, culminating in a devastating moment when the Sandman himself is overwhelmed by Pitch's darkness. This loss forces the remaining Guardians, now including Jack, to fight not just for survival but to protect the last remnants of childhood wonder still left in the world, particularly through the small group of children in Jamie's neighborhood who refused to give up their belief entirely. Jack Frost's personal arc reaches its emotional peak when he discovers the truth about his forgotten past, learning why the man in the moon chose him and understanding the origin of the ice powers he has carried for centuries without knowing their source. This revelation ties directly into the emotional stakes of the final battle against Pitch Black, as Jack must decide whether to embrace his identity as a guardian fully or continue existing in isolation as he has for so long. The climactic confrontation brings the Guardians together in a coordinated effort to protect Jamie and the last believing children from Pitch's nightmare creatures, while also working to restore the Sandman and rekindle the belief that has been slipping away throughout the world. Ultimately, the film builds toward a resolution where courage, friendship, and belief triumph over fear, with Jack Frost fully accepted into the Guardians not because of the powers he holds but because of the compassion, loyalty, and quiet heroism he demonstrates when it matters most. In terms of voice cast, Rise of the Guardians brought together a notably starry lineup for an animated feature. Chris Pine voiced Jack Frost, bringing a blend of humor, vulnerability, and charm to the character's journey of self-discovery. Alec Baldwin voiced North, portraying Santa Claus not as the soft, jolly figure of typical holiday imagery but as a burly, warrior-like protector with a booming presence and a hidden warmth beneath his tough exterior. Isla Fisher voiced Tooth, the Tooth Fairy, giving the character an energetic, warm, and slightly scatterbrained personality paired with fierce protectiveness over children's memories. Hugh Jackman voiced Bunnymund, the Easter Bunny, playing him with a distinct accent and a warrior spirit built around ancient tradition and pride. Jude Law brought a chilling, seductive menace to the role of Pitch Black, using his voice to create a villain who is as tragic and lonely as he is dangerous, driven by his own long history of being forgotten and feared rather than believed in. On the human side, young actor Dakota Goyle voiced Jamie Bennett, the believing child whose faith becomes central to the Guardians' fight, with additional voice performances from a supporting cast of young actors playing Jamie's friends, including Isabella Blake Thomas, Jacob Bertrand, and Kamani Griffin among others who rounded out the ensemble of children representing the world's remaining believers. Rise of the Guardians had its early premiere at the Mill Valley Film Festival on October 10, 2012, before going into its official wide theatrical release in the United States on November 21, 2012, positioning it as a major animated release during the Thanksgiving holiday season of that year, a time typically reserved for high-profile family entertainment. The marketing campaign leading up to the release featured trailers that emphasized the film's blending of iconic childhood figures with a darker, more action-driven fantasy tone than audiences were used to seeing from Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, or the Tooth Fairy, presenting them instead as a band of legendary warriors uniting against a genuine and menacing threat. The trailers highlighted the film's striking visual style, its large-scale action sequences, and its emotional core built around Jack Frost's search for identity and belonging, while also showcasing the film's use of Dolby Atmos surround sound technology, which had only recently been introduced at the time and gave the film's release an added layer of technical prestige in theaters equipped to support it. Behind the scenes, Rise of the Guardians carried a substantial production budget of around $145 million, reflecting the scale of its visual ambitions, the complexity of its character animation, and the reportedly extensive technical development that went into creating believable snow, ice, sand, and light effects throughout the film. Despite generally positive reviews from critics who praised its imaginative premise, its emotional depth, and its animation quality, the film underperformed significantly at the box office relative to its high budget, ultimately grossing around $306 million worldwide. While this number might sound successful on the surface, the enormous production and marketing costs behind the film meant that DreamWorks Animation ended up absorbing a substantial financial loss from the project, outcome that had ripple effects on the studio's business decisions in the years that followed, including its eventual shift away from Paramount as a distribution partner. Despite its underwhelming financial performance, Rise of the Guardians earned recognition within the animation community, receiving a nomination for the Golden Globe Award for Best Animated Feature Film as well as a nomination for the Annie Award for Best Animated Feature, both of which affirmed the artistic merit of the film even as its commercial outcome fell short of expectations. Over time, the film has grown into something of a beloved cult favorite among animation fans, particularly praised for its ambitious visual world building, its surprisingly mature emotional themes around fear, belief, and identity, and its willingness to portray classic childhood icons in a bolder, more mythic light than had been attempted before. Long before the events of the film begin, deep within a frozen lake somewhere in a snow-covered forest, a boy who does not yet know his own name rises up through cracking ice, pulled from beneath the frozen surface by a force he cannot understand. This boy emerges into moonlight, disoriented and shivering, his skin pale as frost, his hair silvery white, and his eyes an unnatural, piercing blue. He looks around at the empty, quiet forest and feels an overwhelming confusion, because he has no memory of who he is, where he came from, or how he ended up rising out of the ice. As he stands trembling on the frozen lake, he notices the full moon hanging high above him, unusually large and bright, almost as if it is watching him directly. Something instinctive within him causes him to speak to the moon, asking who he is, but the moon offers no answer, no voice, no explanation. Confused and frightened, the boy notices a wooden shepherd's crook lying nearby in the snow, and when he lifts it, frost begins to spread from his fingertips across its surface, and ice begins to bloom wherever he touches the ground. He does not understand this power, but it feels natural to him, as though it has always been a part of him. This boy, though he does not know it yet, is Jack Frost, and this moment marks his birth as an immortal spirit of winter, though the reason for his creation remains a mystery even to himself. The film then shifts forward across an unspecified span of centuries, revealing that Jack Frost has been living this strange immortal existence for roughly 300 years, wandering the world using his power over ice, frost, and snow to create innocent fun for children everywhere. He causes snow days by freezing school buses solid, turns sidewalks into skating rinks, provokes snowball fights between children who have no idea he is the one orchestrating their fun, and generally spreads laughter and delight wherever winter touches the world. Despite the joy he brings, Jack suffers from a profound and aching loneliness, because although he can influence the world physically, no child, no adult, and no living soul can see him, hear him, or acknowledge his existence in any way. People walk through him as though he is nothing but air, ignore his presence entirely, and go about their lives with no awareness that a mischievous winter spirit is standing right beside them causing their favorite wintry moments. Jack often speaks his frustrations aloud to nobody in particular, venting about the injustice of centuries spent as an unseen phantom despite his best efforts to be noticed, and he frequently addresses the moon directly during these lonely nights, demanding answers about why he was chosen for this existence, and why the moon, who he believes must know the truth, refuses to explain anything to him. While Jack Frost continues his invisible existence, the film introduces the audience to the secretive world of the Guardians, a group of ancient, immortal beings tasked by the man in the moon with protecting the children of the world by preserving their sense of wonder, hope, dreams, memories, and fun. The leader of this group is North, a towering, heavily muscled version of Santa Claus who bears little resemblance to the soft, cookie-loving image children typically imagine. This North is fierce, boisterous, covered in tattoos referencing naughty and nice lists, and wields twin sabers with tremendous skill, running his North Pole workshop like both a joyful toy factory and a heavily fortified stronghold staffed by elvish helpers and towering, intelligent Yeti workers who actually do most of the real toy building and enforce order behind the scenes. North possesses a deep booming laugh, a thick accent, and an intense passion for delivering wonder to children, treating his role not as some seasonal chore but as a sacred calling that defines his very existence. Alongside North exists Tooth, the Tooth Fairy, portrayed not as a single delicate figure but as a hummingbird-like fairy queen who commands an enormous swarm of miniature fairy helpers that fly around the globe collecting children's teeth the instant they fall out. Tooth cherishes these teeth deeply because each one contains preserved memories of childhood, and she keeps them stored safely within a grand palace that resembles an elaborate structure built from golden cases and towering architecture, watching over these memories as precious treasures rather than simple currency exchanged for coins. There is also Bunnymund, an enormous, muscular Easter bunny with a pronounced accent and a fierce warrior spirit, who spends the entire year preparing intricate, magical Easter eggs and tunnels that stretch beneath the entire globe, treating Easter with the same reverence and seriousness that North treats Christmas. Rounding out the group is Sandy, also known as the Sandman, a small, silent, golden figure who never speaks a single word throughout the film, instead communicating entirely through imagery formed from golden dream sand that appears above his head. Sandy travels the world each night on trails of glowing golden sand, entering children's bedrooms to fill their sleeping minds with joyful, whimsical dreams, and despite his silence, he possesses tremendous inner strength, a mischievous sense of humor, and unwavering loyalty to his fellow guardians. The central conflict of the story begins to take shape when North notices troubling signs that something dark and dangerous is stirring in the world once again. Aurora borealis lights streak unusually across the sky, a signal historically used among the Guardians to call an emergency meeting, and North immediately understands that these lights mean Pitch Black has returned. Pitch, also known as the Boogeyman, is an ancient and bitter spirit who thrives on fear rather than joy, existing as the dark inverse of everything the Guardians represent. Long ago, before the current era, Pitch had been powerful enough to threaten the world with nightmares, but the Guardians managed to defeat him and diminish his influence, banishing him into obscurity where children mostly stopped believing in him as anything more than an old superstition. Now, sensing a rare and perfect opportunity brought about by a lack of strong belief in the world, Pitch begins quietly working to reclaim his former power, using shadowy nightmare creatures shaped like black horses formed from swirling dark sand to spread fear among children while simultaneously working to undermine the Guardians' influence. Called together at the North Pole by the emergency signal, North, Tooth, Bunnymund, and Sandy convene to discuss the threat, with North revealing his suspicion that Pitch is behind the recent disturbances. During this urgent meeting, North also makes a surprising announcement, revealing that the Man in the Moon has selected a brand new Guardian to join their ranks, someone who will be crucial in the coming battle against Pitch, though the Moon does not clarify exactly why this individual has been chosen. The name that appears, glowing in the moonlight projected onto the floor of North's workshop, belongs to Jack Frost, a name the other Guardians immediately react to with confusion and skepticism. Bunnymund in particular voices strong doubts about Jack, viewing him as nothing more than an irresponsible troublemaker who causes chaos and disruption rather than genuine wonder, recalling personal grievances about Jack ruining Easter celebrations in the past through unexpected snowstorms. Despite these objections, North insists that the Moon's choice must be respected, and he sets out personally to find Jack Frost and bring him into the fold, believing that there must be a deeper purpose behind this seemingly unlikely selection. North locates Jack Frost in a small town, engaged in his usual playful mischief of freezing puddles and startling children with sudden bursts of snow. When North's massive sleigh, pulled by powerful reindeer, dramatically crashes through the sky and lands nearby, sending up a cloud of snow and startling nearby onlookers who cannot see either of them, Jack initially reacts with amusement rather than alarm, since he has encountered strange occurrences before during his centuries of invisible wandering. What genuinely stuns him, however, is the realization that North can actually see him and speak directly to him, something no living or immortal being has done in the entire span of Jack's existence. This shock quickly turns to wary curiosity as North explains, in his characteristically loud and enthusiastic manner, that the man in the moon has chosen Jack to become the newest guardian, and that his help is urgently needed to stop a growing threat from pitch black. Jack, understandably skeptical after centuries of being ignored and dismissed by the very world he has tried to bring joy to, questions why he should suddenly trust a group of legendary figures who have never once acknowledged his existence despite living in the same world as him for hundreds of years. Sensing Jack's hesitation and unwillingness to simply be recruited on command, North resorts to more forceful means, instructing his Yetis to capture Jack and bring him back to the North Pole against his will, believing that once Jack sees the workshop and understands the stakes involved, he will come to accept his new role willingly. Upon arriving at the North Pole, Jack finds himself inside an enormous, dazzling workshop filled with intricate machinery, towering shelves of unfinished toys, and dozens of industrious Yeti workers moving with practiced efficiency alongside small, chaotic elves who mostly get in the way rather than help. Jack is introduced properly to Tooth, Bunnymund, and Sandy, and it becomes immediately apparent that the group's opinions of him vary drastically. Tooth is immediately fascinated and delighted by Jack, admitting an almost embarrassing admiration for his teeth, which she insists are remarkably well preserved despite his centuries of existence, showcasing her simultaneously endearing and slightly odd fixation on dental health. Sandy greets Jack with warmth and silent enthusiasm, quickly forming a playful, easy camaraderie built around shared mischief and humor. Bunnymund, however, remains openly hostile and distrustful, unable to forgive Jack for past disruptions to his Easter preparations and doubting that someone so consistently associated with chaos and cold could ever embody the qualities needed to protect children's well-being. When North finally reveals to Jack that the moon has personally selected him to become a guardian, Jack is stunned into silence, overwhelmed by emotions he struggles to process after centuries of being unseen and unwanted by the world at large. However, rather than feeling honored, Jack instead grows suspicious and even bitter, pointing out that the moon has never once spoken to him directly throughout all his years of loneliness and confusion regarding his own identity and origins, and that being handed a sudden important purpose does not erase centuries of abandonment and unanswered questions. Complicating the Guardian's urgent recruitment efforts is a devastating attack that Pitch launches against Tooth's fairy collectors and her Palace of Memories. While the emergency meeting was underway at the North Pole, Pitch used the distraction to orchestrate a coordinated assault on Tooth's fortress, sending waves of his shadowy nightmare creatures to capture nearly all of her tiny fairy helpers and steal away the vast collection of children's teeth stored within the palace. Containers that hold not just teeth but the precious memories tied to each child's most treasured moments. This attack represents a catastrophic blow to the Guardian's mission, since without teeth collection continuing properly, children's memories risk being lost or corrupted, and more importantly, this disruption threatens to undermine children's belief in Tooth herself, weakening her powers and, by extension, weakening the collective strength of all the Guardians whose existence depends on continued belief. Tooth, devastated and desperate, urgently proposes an emergency solution, insisting that the Guardians must personally step in and collect children's teeth themselves for one night in order to prevent this crisis from spiraling further out of control. Recognizing the severity of the situation, North agrees to this plan, and despite Bunnymund's continued reservations, the Guardians decide to enlist Jack's help in this emergency tooth-collecting mission, since his abilities and his newly assigned status might prove useful even if he has not yet formally accepted the Guardian role. During this improvised group mission to collect teeth in place of Tooth's captured fairies, the story introduces Jamie Bennett, a young boy who plays a pivotal role throughout the rest of the narrative. Jamie is depicted as an imaginative, gentle child who still holds a deep and genuine belief in figures like Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny, standing in contrast to many of his peers who have already begun to grow skeptical and dismissive of these childhood icons as they get older. It is at Jamie's house that the Guardians, along with a reluctant Jack Frost, attempt their tooth-collecting mission, with Jack in particular growing increasingly invested in interacting with Jamie despite still being unable to be seen or heard by him. Throughout this sequence, subtle hints emerge that Jamie possesses an unusually strong connection to the Guardians compared to other children, foreshadowing his later importance in the fight against Pitch. During the mission, tensions between Jack and the other Guardians, particularly Bunnymund, come to a head when an incident nearly exposes their secretive operation and results in further blame being placed on Jack for causing complications, deepening the rift between him and the more established members of the group. Despite these frustrations, small moments of connection and camaraderie begin to form, particularly between Jack and Sandy, whose easygoing nature and playful mischief mirror Jack's own personality far more than the sterner temperaments of North and Bunnymund. As tensions and stakes rise, Pitch Black himself begins to make more direct appearances throughout the story, revealed to reside within a shadowy, cavernous lair filled with cages holding the captured tooth fairies and dominated by ominous black sand that responds to his will, forming into menacing nightmare horses whenever he commands them. Pitch is portrayed as an intelligent, articulate, and deeply resentful figure who does not see himself as purely evil, but rather as a misunderstood and overlooked entity who has spent centuries being feared, hated, and forgotten, paralleling in some ways Jack Frost's own experience of loneliness and invisibility, though twisted into bitterness and a desire for dominance rather than connection. Pitch expresses genuine disdain for the Guardians, viewing their traditions of wonder, joy, and hope as naive illusions that ultimately leave children unprepared for the harsh realities of fear and darkness that he believes are fundamental truths of existence. Recognizing something familiar and potentially useful in Jack's own isolation and unresolved anger toward the moon, Pitch begins attempting to manipulate Jack directly, appearing to him privately and suggesting that the two of them share more in common than Jack might realize. Hinting that Jack could find a sense of belonging and power by aligning with Pitch rather than continuing to seek acceptance from Guardians who do not fully trust or understand him. The story's tension escalates dramatically leading into the sequence centered around Easter, a holiday that Bunnymund treats with utmost seriousness and reverence. Having spent the entire year preparing elaborate designs and magical eggs meant to inspire hope and renewal in children worldwide, Bunnymund's plans are catastrophically disrupted when Pitch orchestrates an attack that ruins the Easter preparations entirely, flooding Bunnymund's underground tunnels and destroying the eggs before they can be delivered to children around the world. This devastating sabotage represents one of Pitch's most significant victories in the story so far, dealing a serious blow to Bunnymund's belief-based power and causing widespread disappointment among children who wake up to find no Easter surprises waiting for them. In the aftermath of this disaster, tensions among the Guardians reach a breaking point, with blame unfairly directed toward Jack Frost, whose earlier interactions with Pitch and his general reputation for causing wintry disruptions make him an easy scapegoat despite the true culprit being Pitch himself. Feeling wrongly blamed, deeply hurt, and pushed to his emotional limit after enduring centuries of solitude followed by immediate distrust and hostility from the very Guardians who were supposed to welcome him, Jack Frost lashes out and storms away from the group entirely, abandoning any commitment he may have been building toward the Guardian role. In this vulnerable, isolated state, Jack becomes increasingly susceptible to Pitch's continued manipulation. Pitch approaches Jack once more, this time offering him a proposition rooted in shared understanding rather than outright villainy, suggesting that the world does not need to see or believe in either of them for their power to matter, since fear, much like Jack Frost, can command attention and control on its own terms. During this exchange, Pitch also reveals that he possesses knowledge Jack has desperately sought for centuries, information regarding Jack's forgotten past and the true nature of his origins, dangling this revelation as bait to draw Jack further into his influence. Despite his anger and loneliness, Jack ultimately hesitates to fully commit to Pitch's offer, sensing an inherent wrongness in Pitch's worldview even as he struggles with his own unresolved grief and resentment. The emotional turning point of the story arrives when Jack finally confronts the truth about his own past, a revelation intricately tied to the golden containers of memories housed within Tooth's fairy collection. Even amid the chaos of Pitch's attacks, it is revealed that one particular golden tooth container has survived, one belonging specifically to Jack Frost himself, hidden away and preserved among the treasures Tooth guards so carefully. Tooth, recognizing the emotional significance this discovery could hold for Jack, offers to show him this container, allowing him to finally witness fragmented memories from his life before becoming an immortal winter spirit. Through this deeply moving sequence, Jack discovers that in his human life, he had a beloved little sister who he cared for deeply, and that he ultimately died protecting her from falling through thin ice on a frozen lake, sacrificing himself to save her life during what should have been a light-hearted day of ice skating together. This revelation reframes everything Jack has believed about his existence, revealing that his transformation into an immortal spirit was not some arbitrary or cruel twist of fate, but rather a continuation of the same protective, selfless love that defined his final human act, now extended toward all children rather than just his sister alone. Understanding this profound truth begins to shift Jack's perspective on his purpose, helping him see that his centuries of playful, joyful mischief were never meaningless, but rather an extension of his original nature to protect and delight children even without conscious awareness of why he felt compelled to do so. Armed with this newfound understanding of his own history and purpose, Jack Frost firmly rejects Pitch's offer to join him, choosing instead to embrace the values the Guardians represent, even though his relationship with them remains strained following the Easter disaster and the unresolved blame placed upon him. Enraged by this rejection and desperate to eliminate any remaining threat to his rise to power, Pitch retaliates by attacking Sandy directly during one of his nightly missions delivering dreams to children. In a heartbreaking and pivotal moment in the story, Pitch overwhelms Sandy using his vastly amplified dark sand power, seemingly destroying Sandy entirely and eliminating one of the Guardians' most gentle and steadfast members. This loss represents a devastating blow not just emotionally, but strategically, since Sandy's golden dream sand had long served as a crucial counterbalance to Pitch's nightmares, and without him, Pitch's influence over children's fears grows unchecked, spreading nightmares and doubt across the world with terrifying speed. Following Sandy's apparent destruction, belief in the remaining Guardians begins to erode rapidly as Pitch's nightmares spread panic and doubt among children worldwide, weakening North, Tooth, and Bunnymund significantly, since their power and vitality are directly tied to how strongly children believe in them. During this dire period, Jack returns to the remaining Guardians, now emotionally transformed and determined to fight for what he now understands as his true purpose. Despite lingering tension, particularly with Bunnymund, the shared urgency of the crisis begins to mend the fractures within the group, as they collectively realize that stopping Pitch is no longer simply a matter of duty, but a fight for the very survival of hope, wonder, and joy in the lives of children everywhere. It is during this period of regrouping that the Guardians travel to Jamie Bennett's town once again, recognizing that Jamie represents one of the last remaining children in the world who still holds firm, unwavering belief in them despite the spreading tide of fear and doubt caused by Pitch's nightmares affecting his friends and community. As Pitch's influence grows stronger, he begins directly targeting Jamie and his group of friends, recognizing that their persistent belief represents a serious obstacle to his plans for total dominance over children's imaginations. Nightmares intensify around the town, manifesting visibly as shadowy horse-like creatures that stalk the streets and invade the dreams and waking fears of children who had previously held on to their belief in the Guardians. Realizing the danger Jamie and his friends now face, the Guardians, alongside a fully committed Jack Frost, resolved to protect this small group of children directly, understanding that safeguarding their belief may be the key to eventually restoring hope and turning the tide against Pitch's rising power. This leads to an intense and chaotic confrontation in which Pitch unleashes waves of nightmare creatures against Jamie's neighborhood, forcing the Guardians into direct combat to shield the children from overwhelming fear and darkness. Amid this pivotal battle, Jack Frost plays an especially crucial role, using his ice powers not just for mischief this time but as a genuine weapon and shield to protect Jamie and his friends from harm, demonstrating tangible growth in his understanding of what it truly means to embrace the responsibilities of a guardian. During this dramatic confrontation, an emotionally powerful turning point occurs when Jamie, despite the terrifying nightmare creatures surrounding him, catches a fleeting glimpse of Jack Frost amid the chaos and begins to believe in him directly for the first time, an extraordinary moment considering that Jack has never been visible to any child throughout his centuries of existence. This budding belief from Jamie represents a profound shift, not only affirming Jack's place among the Guardians but also granting him a taste of the connection and recognition he has longed for since his transformation centuries earlier. Encouraged by this breakthrough, Jamie's steadfast belief begins to inspire his friends as well, gradually helping to push back against the fear Pitch has been spreading, as the children collectively begin reclaiming their courage and hope even in the face of Pitch's most aggressive assault yet. The confrontation builds toward a decisive climax as the Guardians, now fully united alongside Jack Frost, make a final stand against Pitch Black and his overwhelming army of nightmare creatures. During this climactic battle, it is revealed that Sandy has not been permanently destroyed after all, and through a triumphant and emotionally satisfying twist, he returns to the fight with renewed strength, having survived Pitch's earlier assault and regrouped in time to aid his fellow Guardians during their most desperate hour. Sandy's dramatic return significantly shifts the balance of power, as his golden dream sand proves instrumental in countering Pitch's nightmares directly, transforming darkness back into light and beginning to unravel the fear that Pitch has spent the entire story cultivating. Working together, the Guardians combine their unique strengths, with North's fierce combat skills, Tooth's speed and precision, Bunnymun's tactical expertise and weaponry, Sandy's restored dream powers, and Jack's now fully embraced ice abilities, forming a united front that finally begins to overwhelm Pitch's forces. As the battle reaches its climax, Jamie and his friends play an unexpectedly vital role in turning the tide entirely. Rather than remaining passive observers, the children begin actively resisting Pitch's attempts to instill fear within them, drawing strength from their renewed belief in the Guardians and in each other, effectively weakening Pitch's power at its very source. This collective display of courage and belief proves to be the decisive factor in the battle, as Pitch, who draws his strength entirely from fear, finds himself steadily losing power as the children refuse to succumb to the darkness surrounding them. In a critical moment, Jamie directly confronts his own fear of Pitch, choosing instead to embrace belief and courage, an act that visibly weakens Pitch and causes his nightmare creatures to begin dissolving into harmless wisps of black sand. Sensing his rapidly diminishing power, Pitch grows desperate and increasingly unstable, lashing out with what remains of his strength in a final, futile attempt to reclaim dominance over the children and the Guardians alike. In the story's climactic final confrontation, Jack Frost steps forward as a central figure in delivering the finishing blow against Pitch, using his ice powers in a display of both strength and control that reflects his complete transformation from an aimless, lonely spirit into a fully realized guardian. Working in tandem with Sandy's restored dream sand and the collective belief of Jamie and his friends, the combined efforts of the Guardians and the children successfully overwhelm Pitch, stripping him of the power he had built up throughout the story and forcing him into retreat. Defeated and diminished, Pitch is left with no choice but to flee back into the shadows from which he emerged, his ambitions of ruling through fear crushed by the very belief and hope he had sought to extinguish. Though the story leaves open the possibility that Pitch, being an immortal spirit himself, may return again someday, his immediate threat is decisively neutralized, restoring balance and safety to the world of children he had sought to dominate. In the aftermath of this victory, the story shifts toward a warm and satisfying resolution, focusing on Jack Frost's official acceptance into the ranks of the Guardians. Standing together with North, Tooth, Bunnymund, and Sandy, Jack is formally recognized not through some grand ceremonial gesture alone, but through the genuine respect and camaraderie he has earned throughout the course of the story, with even the previously skeptical Bunnymund now fully embracing him as a trusted friend and equal. The Man in the Moon, who has remained a distant and silent guiding presence throughout the entire narrative, is finally given a moment of quiet acknowledgement, as Jack looks up toward the sky with newfound understanding and peace regarding his purpose, no longer angry or confused about his mysterious origins, but grateful for the path that eventually led him toward belonging and meaning. Jamie and his friends, having played such a crucial role in the story's climax, are shown continuing to believe wholeheartedly in the Guardians, their friendship with Jack Frost in particular representing a profound and lasting connection built on mutual belief and trust, a stark contrast to the centuries of loneliness and invisibility Jack endured before the events of the film. The story closes on a tone of hopeful continuity, showing Jack Frost returning to his familiar role of spreading wintry fun and joy among children, only now imbued with the added purpose and confidence of officially being one of the Guardians tasked with protecting the wonder, hope, dreams, memories, and fun of children everywhere. His centuries-long isolation has given way to genuine connection, both with the children he continues to delight, and with his fellow Guardians who now stand beside him as true companions rather than skeptical strangers. Ultimately, the narrative of Rise of the Guardians tells a story about identity, belonging, and the transformative power of belief, following Jack Frost's journey from an unseen, forgotten spirit wandering the world alone to a fully embraced Guardian who finally understands that his true strength was never solely rooted in his icy powers, but in the compassion, sacrifice, and quiet heroism that defined him from the very beginning of his existence. Chris Pine, the actor who lent his voice to the mischievous and lonely winter spirit Jack Frost, was born Christopher Whitelaw Pine on August 26, 1980, in Los Angeles, California, into a family with deep and long-standing roots in the entertainment industry. His father, Robert Pine, built a long career as a television actor best remembered for his role as a sergeant in a popular police drama, while his mother, Gwyn Guilford, worked as an actress before later transitioning into a career as a psychotherapist. Chris also has an older sister, Catherine Pine, who followed the family tradition and became an actress herself, and his maternal grandmother, and Gwyn, had been a recognizable leading lady in Hollywood films during the 1940s, making Chris the third generation of his family to work within the film industry. Growing up surrounded by conversations about scripts, auditions, and film sets, Chris was exposed to the rhythms of show business from a very young age, often accompanying his parents to studios and observing the process of filmmaking firsthand. Despite this early exposure, his personal passions as a child leaned more toward athletics than performance, and it was not until his high school years that his interests began shifting meaningfully toward acting as a potential path for his own future. He attended Oakwood School in the San Fernando Valley before enrolling at the University of California, Berkeley, where he devoted himself to studying English and immersed himself in the university's theater department, performing in a range of productions spanning classical Greek drama to contemporary works. During his time at Berkeley, Chris also spent a year abroad studying at the University of Leeds in England, an experience that broadened his cultural perspective before he returned to complete his degree. After graduating in 2002, he pursued formal actor training at the Williamstown Theater Festival in Massachusetts and later at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, sharpening the technical skills that would support his transition into professional acting. His earliest professional opportunities arrived in 2003, when he appeared in a small role on the medical drama series ER, followed shortly afterward by guest appearances on other television programs. His feature film debut came in 2004 when he was cast opposite Anne Hathaway in a sequel to a beloved Disney comedy about a young princess, a role that introduced him to mainstream audiences as a charming romantic lead. He continued building his career through the mid-2000s with additional romantic comedy roles before taking a notable turn toward darker material in an ensemble crime thriller that allowed him to demonstrate a grittier, more villainous side of his range. The defining moment of his career arrived in 2009, when he was cast as the young Captain James Kirk in a highly anticipated reboot of a legendary science fiction franchise, a role that had previously been closely associated with another iconic actor from decades earlier. Chris Pine's portrayal was widely praised for balancing charisma, humor, and quiet vulnerability, and the film's massive success elevated him into the ranks of Hollywood's most bankable leading men. He reprised this same role across 2 subsequent sequels, further cementing his association with the character throughout the following decade. Alongside this science fiction franchise, Chris continued to diversify his filmography considerably, taking on dramatic roles, action thrillers, and even a light-hearted animated voice performance as Jack Frost in Rise of the Guardians, where his natural charm and slightly rebellious energy suited the character's centuries-long journey from isolated wanderer to accepted guardian. In the years following his voice work in that animated film, Chris continued expanding his range through further dramatic performances, comedic ensemble work, and a highly successful turn as a supporting hero in a major superhero blockbuster centered on a legendary warrior princess. Throughout his career, Chris Pine has remained known for gravitating toward complex, layered characters rather than simply relying on conventional leading man charisma, a tendency that traces back to his early theatrical training and his family's long-standing tradition of taking acting seriously as a craft rather than simply a means to fame. Alec Baldwin, who brought his commanding presence to the role of North, the fierce and larger-than-life version of Santa Claus in Rise of the Guardians, was born Alexander Ray Baldwin III on April 3, 1958, in Amityville, New York, and was later raised in the nearby town of Massapequa. He was the eldest of 6 children born to Carol Newcomb and Alexander Ray Baldwin Jr., with his father working as a high school history and social studies teacher and football coach, while his mother managed the household and later became known for her charitable involvement. Alec has 3 younger brothers, all of whom would go on to become actors themselves, along with 2 younger sisters, making the Baldwin family one of the more recognizable acting dynasties in American entertainment. Growing up in a large, close-knit household with a strong emphasis on education, Alec attended Alfred G. Burner High School, where he took part in football before eventually enrolling at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., initially intending to pursue a political science degree with future plans of attending law school. During his college years, however, his childhood fascination with acting resurfaced with unexpected intensity, ultimately leading him to abandon his original academic path in favor of pursuing a career in performance. He transferred to New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, where he studied drama seriously and eventually earned a place among the respected members of the Actors Studio, an institution long associated with rigorous, method-based approaches to acting craft. While working toward establishing himself in New York's competitive entertainment industry, Alec took on various jobs to support himself, including a stint working as a busboy at a legendary Manhattan nightclub during its cultural heyday. His earliest professional acting credit came in 1980, when he was cast in a recurring role on a daytime television soap opera, playing a young man whose storyline ultimately concluded with his character's death after 2 years on the series. He continued building his television career throughout the early 1980s, eventually landing a substantial role on another popular nighttime soap opera where he portrayed one of the show's central characters for several years. His transition into feature films began to take shape later in the decade, with a series of notable supporting and lead roles that showcased his range across genres, including a beloved supernatural comedy directed by a visionary filmmaker known for his distinctive visual style, as well as prominent roles in dramas exploring corporate ambition and media manipulation. In the years that followed, Alec Baldwin continued building an impressively varied filmography, taking on both leading and supporting roles across submarine thrillers, ensemble dramas, and character-driven independent films, earning critical acclaim and award recognition along the way, including an Academy Award nomination for a dramatic performance centered on addiction and personal struggle. Perhaps his most widely recognized role for an entire generation of television audiences came through his long-running portrayal of a shrewd, eccentric television network executive on an acclaimed workplace comedy series, a performance that earned him numerous industry awards and cemented his reputation as a gifted comedic performer in addition to his dramatic talents. Beyond his acting work, Alec Baldwin became known for his frequent guest appearances on a long-running late-night sketch comedy program, where his recurring impersonations of prominent political figures earned him significant recognition and further broadened his cultural visibility. His voice work in Rise of the Guardians, portraying North with a booming accent, fierce warrior spirit, and hidden warmth, represented a playful departure from his more dramatic film roles, allowing him to bring both humor and gravity to a character who defies the conventional gentle image typically associated with Santa Claus. Alongside his acting career, Alec has also worked as an author, publishing several books including a memoir reflecting on his personal and professional experiences, and he has long been recognized as a passionate advocate for various charitable and animal welfare causes throughout his life. Jude Law, whose voice gave chilling life to the story's central antagonist, Pitch Black, was born David Jude Hayworth Law on December 29, 1972, in Lewisham, London, England, to parents Margaret and Peter Robert Law, both of whom worked as teachers at comprehensive schools, with his father eventually rising to the position of headmaster. Jude has explained that his distinctive first name was chosen by his parents as a tribute both to a classic literary novel and to a famous song by a beloved rock band, reflecting the creative and culturally engaged household in which he was raised. From an early age, Jude displayed a strong interest in performance, and by his teenage years he had begun participating in youth theater programs, eventually joining the National Youth Music Theater, where he developed foundational skills in stage performance. He made an early professional appearance in a television film adaptation of a classic children's story in 1989, gradually building experience through additional television and theater work throughout his late teenage years. His formal stage career began to take shape in the early 1990s, and by 1992 he had begun earning attention for his work in London theatre productions, receiving early recognition through award nominations for outstanding newcomer performances. Jude's work eventually led him to a notable stage production that transferred from London to Broadway, where he performed alongside a celebrated American actress and earned a Tony Award nomination for his supporting performance, along with a prestigious theater award recognizing his achievement. Following this stage success, Jude transitioned into feature films throughout the mid to late 1990s, taking on roles in a science fiction drama exploring genetic engineering and a period drama set in the American South, before achieving major international breakthrough in 1999 through his unforgettable supporting performance in a psychological thriller centered on obsession and identity, opposite a young Matt Damon. This performance earned him a British Academy Film Award along with nominations for both a Golden Globe and an Academy Award, establishing him firmly as one of the most promising actors of his generation. He continued building on this momentum throughout the early 2000s with prominent roles in a wartime drama set during a pivotal historical battle and a sweeping period romance for which he received a second Academy Award nomination, further solidifying his reputation for delivering emotionally complex, layered performances. As his career progressed through the following decade, Jude took on an eclectic mix of roles spanning science fiction dramas exploring artificial intelligence, crime dramas, and a beloved portrayal of the loyal companion Dr. Watson in a modernized adaptation of a classic detective franchise, appearing alongside Robert Downey Jr. across multiple installments. His voice work as Pitch Black in Rise of the Guardians allowed him to explore a villainous role unlike much of his earlier filmography, bringing a seductive, articulate menace to a character whose motivations stem from centuries of being feared and forgotten rather than simple malevolence, echoing thematic parallels to the story's exploration of loneliness and belief. In the years following this animated performance, Jude continued expanding his range through further prestigious dramatic roles, an acclaimed portrayal of a fictional pope in a critically praised television series, and continued appearances across major studio franchises exploring magical and superhero universes. Throughout his personal life, Jude has been the father to several children from multiple relationships, and he has generally sought to maintain a degree of privacy regarding his family life despite his prominent public career, remaining primarily known to audiences worldwide for the emotional depth and versatility he consistently brings to his performances. Isla Fisher, who voiced the energetic and fiercely protective Tooth Fairy in Rise of the Guardians, was born Isla Lang Fisher on February 3, 1976, in Muscat, Oman, where her father, Brian Fisher, was working at the time as a banker for the United Nations, while her mother, Elspeth Reed, worked as a writer. Isla spent portions of her early childhood in Scotland before her family made the decision to relocate to Perth, Western Australia, when she was approximately 6 years old, and it was in this Australian coastal city that she would spend the remainder of her childhood and adolescence alongside her siblings. Isla has often described her upbringing in Perth fondly, characterizing it as an outdoorsy, laid-back environment that shaped her easygoing sensibility and her strong personal identification with Australian culture despite her international origins. She attended Swanbourne Primary School before continuing her education at Methodist Ladies' College, and throughout her school years she gravitated naturally toward performance, taking on lead roles in various school theatrical productions. Isla's professional career began remarkably early, as she started appearing in television commercials around the age of 9, gradually building experience that led to small television roles by her early teenage years. Her most significant early career breakthrough came through her casting in a long-running Australian television soap opera, where she portrayed a young woman navigating serious personal and emotional struggles over the course of several years and hundreds of episodes, earning multiple award nominations recognizing her rising popularity among Australian audiences. Beyond her acting pursuits during this period, Isla also demonstrated an early talent for writing, publishing 2 teen novels with her mother's encouragement, while still a teenager herself, both of which went on to achieve considerable commercial success. Seeking to expand her artistic training beyond television acting, Isla made the decision in her early 20s to move to Paris, where she enrolled at a well-regarded international theater school to study physical performance disciplines including clown work, mime, and traditional Italian comedic theater forms. An experience that broadened her performance skills considerably despite her not speaking French upon her arrival. Isla's transition into American film work began to take shape in the early 2000s, with a breakthrough supporting role in a live-action adaptation of a beloved animated mystery franchise, followed by additional film appearances that gradually built her recognition among American audiences. Her most significant career turning point arrived in 2005, when she starred in a hugely successful comedy about 2 friends who crash weddings in search of romantic encounters, delivering a memorable comedic performance that earned her a major industry award recognizing breakthrough talent and established her as a rising comedic star in Hollywood. She continued building on this momentum throughout the following years with a steady stream of comedic and dramatic film roles, eventually taking on more complex dramatic material, including a notable supporting performance in a lavish adaptation of a classic American literary novel centered on wealth and tragedy during the 1920s. Her voice work as Tooth in Rise of the Guardians allowed her to bring her natural comedic energy and warmth to an animated character defined by fierce protectiveness over children's memories, blending humor with genuine emotional sincerity in a role well suited to her established strengths as a performer. Following her work in this animated feature, Isla continued to build her filmography with additional roles in ensemble comedies and heist thrillers, while also expanding into published children's literature through a series of successful books. Isla has long balanced her acting career with charitable and environmental advocacy work throughout her life, reflecting personal values she has maintained since her early years as a public figure. Hugh Jackman, who lent his voice and larger-than-life presence to the tough, warrior-spirited Easter Bunny character known as Bunnymund, was born Hugh Michael Jackman on October 12, 1968, in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, the youngest of 5 children in his family. His parents divorced when Hugh was still a young child, after which his mother relocated to England while his father remained in Australia to raise all 5 children largely on his own, an experience that shaped much of Hughes' early upbringing and his close relationship with his father throughout his youth. Remarkably, Hughes' earliest acting experience came at the age of just 5, when he took on the role of King Arthur in a local production of a classic musical, offering an early glimpse of the performance talent that would eventually define his professional life. Despite this early theatrical experience, Hughes' primary interests throughout much of his childhood and adolescence centered around sports, particularly athletics, and it was not until his later school years that his focus began shifting more seriously toward the performing arts. He attended the well-regarded Knox Grammar School before continuing his education at the University of Technology, Sydney, where he earned a degree in communications with a focus on journalism, graduating in 1991 without initially planning for a career centered on acting. Following his graduation, Hugh took on a variety of temporary jobs to support himself financially while pursuing further training, eventually enrolling in a rigorous year-long acting program at the Actors Centre in Sydney, where he committed himself fully to developing his craft. His early professional career unfolded primarily within Australian television and theatre, where he took on stage roles in various musical productions throughout the mid-1990s, gradually building a reputation as a versatile performer capable of both dramatic and musical work. His first significant feature film role came through an Australian production in 1999, which earned him a nomination for a prestigious Australian Film Institute Acting Award and helped establish his credibility as a serious dramatic performer within his home country's film industry. Hughes' career changed dramatically in the year 2000, when he was cast, somewhat unexpectedly as a late addition to the production, in the role of a brooding, clawed mutant superhero in a major Hollywood adaptation of a beloved comic book franchise. Despite having limited prior experience with action-oriented blockbuster filmmaking, Hughes' combination of physical presence, theatrical training, and emotional depth allowed him to embody the character in a way that resonated powerfully with audiences, ultimately leading him to reprise this same iconic role across numerous sequels and spin-off films over the following 2 decades. Alongside this defining franchise role, Hugh continued to build a remarkably diverse career that showcased his considerable range as a performer, taking on a light-hearted romantic fantasy comedy early in his Hollywood career, along with darker gothic horror action films, and prestigious dramatic period pieces exploring themes of magic and obsession. His talents extended well beyond film, as he continued nurturing his theatrical roots through acclaimed Broadway performances, including a celebrated portrayal of a flamboyant Australian musician that earned him a Tony Award in 2004, along with an Emmy Award for his work hosting that same year's Tony Awards ceremony. Hughes' voice performance as Bunnymund in Rise of the Guardians allowed him to bring his natural charisma and commanding physical presence to an animated character defined by fierce pride, ancient tradition, and hidden warmth beneath a gruff exterior, drawing on the same blend of intensity and heart that had defined much of his live-action work throughout his career. In the years following this animated film, Hugh continued to expand his legacy through additional dramatic film roles, further installments of his signature superhero franchise, and a highly celebrated leading performance in a lavish movie musical inspired by the story of a 19th-century entertainment showman, which showcased his singing and dancing talents to global audiences in a way that echoed his earliest theatrical roots. Dakota Goyle, who provided the voice of Jamie Bennett, the young boy whose unwavering belief becomes central to the Guardians' fight against pitch black, was born Dakota Avery Goyle on August 22, 1999, in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He began his career remarkably early, appearing in his very first television commercial while still an infant, an early entry point into an entertainment career that would continue developing steadily throughout his childhood years. His formal television debut came at the age of 5, when he appeared in a pilot production for a major American television network, and from there he continued building experience across a range of Canadian and American television programs throughout his early childhood, including guest and recurring appearances on various children's educational programming and popular Canadian drama series. Dakota's natural aptitude for performance, along with his notable ability to memorize dialogue and convey genuine emotional depth at a young age, quickly caught the attention of casting directors working across both television and film. His first significant feature film role arrived at only 6 years old, when he portrayed the son of a central character in a sports drama exploring themes of family reconciliation and personal redemption, a performance that earned him considerable critical praise along with a nomination for a respected award recognizing excellence in young actors' performances. He continued building his filmography over the following years, appearing alongside veteran, highly respected actors in additional dramatic film projects that further showcased his emotional range well beyond what might typically be expected from an actor of his age. In early 2010, following an extensive nationwide casting search conducted by a major American film studio, Dakota was selected at the age of 10 to play the central lead role of a young boy navigating a complicated relationship with his estranged father in a science fiction drama centered around robot boxing, working alongside Hugh Jackman in a leading role that placed him at the emotional heart of the film. This performance earned him a Young Artist Award along with a nomination for a prestigious genre-focused acting award, further establishing his growing reputation within the industry as a remarkably capable young performer. Later that same year, Dakota was cast in a highly anticipated Marvel superhero feature, portraying a younger version of the film's legendary title character during a flashback sequence, working alongside a celebrated veteran actor portraying the character's father figure. It was during this same period of his young but rapidly expanding career that Dakota was cast to provide the voice of Jamie Bennett in Rise of the Guardians, taking on a role that required him to convey childlike wonder, unwavering belief, and quiet courage as his character becomes instrumental in restoring the Guardians' strength during their darkest hour in the story. Following his work on this animated film, Dakota continued to build his filmography through his early teenage years, including a leading role in a science fiction thriller and a supporting performance in a large-scale biblical epic centered on the story of Noah, working alongside several internationally recognized actors. Throughout his childhood acting career, Dakota earned recognition for his consistency and maturity as a performer, including an Emmy Award nomination received while still quite young, reflecting an unusually accomplished. Rise of the Guardians stands as one of the most technically ambitious and financially significant productions in the history of DreamWorks Animation, carrying a reported production budget in the range of $145 million, a figure that placed it firmly among the most expensive animated films made up to that point in the studio's history. This substantial budget reflected the scale of the creative vision behind the project, since bringing together 5 entirely new characters, each requiring distinct visual language, animation style, and physical presence, demanded an enormous amount of design work, technical development, and specialized artistry that could not simply be recycled from previous DreamWorks productions. Unlike many animated features that can lean on established visual shorthand for familiar character types, Rise of the Guardians required its creative team to essentially invent 5 different mythologies from scratch, each with a wholly original visual identity, giving the film's budget a justification rooted less in marketing spectacle and more in genuine creative ambition. Despite the film going on to gross approximately $306 million worldwide, a number that on its surface looks like a clear commercial success, the enormous combined weight of production costs and an aggressive worldwide marketing campaign meant that DreamWorks Animation ultimately absorbed a loss estimated at around $87 million once all expenses were accounted for. This outcome made Rise of the Guardians one of the largest financial write-downs in the studio's history at the time, a sobering reminder of just how difficult it can be for even a beautifully crafted, well-reviewed animated film to actually turn a profit once marketing, distribution, and overhead costs are factored into the final accounting. In the aftermath of this financial disappointment, DreamWorks Animation was forced to make significant internal changes, including a reported reduction of hundreds of jobs across the studio, illustrating just how directly the commercial performance of a single big-budget release can ripple outward into the livelihoods of the artists, technicians, and staff working behind the scenes on future projects. The making of Rise of the Guardians involved an extraordinary combination of technical innovation and old-fashioned collaborative artistry, blending traditional animation storytelling with genuinely groundbreaking visual effects work that pushed the boundaries of what computer-generated animation could achieve at the time. One of the most significant technical contributions to the film came through the involvement of the legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins, who is widely regarded as one of the finest lighting and visual artists working in live-action filmmaking. Brought onto the project in a visual consulting capacity after having previously lent similar expertise to an earlier DreamWorks production centered on dragons and Viking culture. Deakins worked closely with the animation team to develop the lighting language of Rise of the Guardians, selecting real-world photographic references to inform the color palette of key scenes and providing detailed notes throughout production regarding contrast levels, color saturation, depth of field choices, and overall light intensity. Essentially applying the same rigorous cinematographic sensibility he would bring to a live-action feature film to an entirely animated world. This collaboration between a celebrated live-action cinematographer and an animation studio represented a somewhat unusual but ultimately highly effective creative partnership, one that helped give Rise of the Guardians a distinctively moody, atmospheric visual quality that set it apart from many of its more brightly lit animated contemporaries. Particularly in scenes involving Pitch Black's shadowy nightmare world and the icy, moonlit environments associated with Jack Frost. Alongside this cinematographic collaboration, the production also demanded genuine technological innovation in order to bring certain key visual elements of the story to life convincingly. Because so much of the film's narrative and visual identity depended on rendering complex, amorphous substances such as Sandman's golden dream sand, Pitch Black's swirling dark nightmare tendrils, and Jack Frost's icy, particle-based magic. The effects team at DreamWorks Animation found themselves needing a more efficient and powerful tool for handling these kinds of volumetric visual effects than what existed within their production pipeline at the time. In response to this challenge, the studio's technical team developed an entirely new tool and data format known as OpenVDB, designed specifically to handle the complex task of storing and manipulating volumetric data such as smoke, sand, and other flowing, non-solid visual elements far more efficiently than previous methods had allowed. This new format had actually already seen some earlier use on other DreamWorks productions involving a mischievous cat character and a globe-trotting animal ensemble comedy, but Rise of the Guardians served as one of its most extensive and visually demanding applications given how central these volumetric effects were to characters like Sandman and Pitch. Remarkably, rather than keeping this valuable piece of proprietary technology locked away as a competitive advantage, DreamWorks Animation made the decision to release OpenVDB as a free, open-source project to the wider visual effects and animation community in the same year the film was released. Hoping that the tool might eventually become a shared industry standard that could benefit animation and visual effects studios well beyond their own walls. A genuinely generous and forward-thinking contribution to the broader craft of computer animation. The animation process itself unfolded through a carefully organized system in which supervising or lead animators were assigned individual responsibility over specific characters, allowing each guardian and major figure in the story to develop a consistent, believable personality across the many different sequences and emotional beats required throughout the film. Jack Frost's animation was overseen by a dedicated supervising animator focused specifically on capturing his blend of playful mischief and underlying loneliness, while separate animators took charge of North, Bunnymund, Sandman, Tooth, Pitch, and young Jamie Bennett respectively, essentially functioning as though each animator were building and inhabiting a distinct performance for their assigned character much the way an actor would approach a role. Members of the animation team have since described this process as feeling almost like inventing entirely new actors from scratch, since so much of the emotional believability of the film depended on getting subtle facial expressions, body language, and physical mannerisms exactly right for characters who had no prior visual precedent to draw from. Because the film needed to convincingly blend broad comedic humor, deeply serious emotional drama, and large-scale action sequences all within the same relatively tight 97-minute runtime, the animation supervisors placed particular emphasis on making sure the characters felt genuinely believable in every context, reinforcing the film's central thematic emphasis on the power and importance of belief itself, both within the story and in the animation craft supporting it. This attention to detail extended even to the underlying technical rigging systems used to control each character's movement and facial expression, with riggers putting significant extra effort into ensuring that character faces maintained proper volume and natural shape integrity across every possible expression and movement. A seemingly small technical detail that nonetheless had an enormous cumulative impact on how emotionally convincing the characters felt to audiences watching the finished film. Beyond the animation and visual effects work, another significant element of the film's development involved its notably starry voice cast, which brought together an unusually high concentration of major Hollywood names for a single animated feature, including Chris Pine, Alec Baldwin, Jude Law, Isla Fisher, and Hugh Jackman. Given the immense popularity and correspondingly busy schedules of these performers, the production faced a genuinely practical challenge in simply coordinating their availability for voice recording sessions, and director Peter Ramsey has spoken candidly about how difficult it was to ever get this level of acting talent together in the same room at the same time, let alone for the extended, multi-hour sessions typically required to record dialogue for an animated feature. As a result, nearly all of the film's principal voice actors recorded their performances separately, each working alone in a recording booth with only the director present to guide their performance, rather than interacting directly with their fellow cast members during the recording process. Alec Baldwin has spoken about this reality directly, explaining that despite the film's ensemble feel on screen, he only ever did one single joint recording session throughout the entire production, working alongside Chris Pine, while all of his other scenes were recorded independently. Reflecting the reality that DreamWorks' casting model tends to draw from performers who are almost constantly in demand and traveling between multiple projects simultaneously. Interestingly, Peter Ramsey has noted that this isolated recording process actually created a surprisingly intimate creative environment in certain respects, since actors recording alone in a booth were freed from the usual pressures of live-action filmmaking such as costume changes, makeup touch-ups, or a large crew and entourage standing around watching their every take. Instead, the process became something closer to two people quietly workshopping lines together over and over, with actors needing to rely far more heavily on their own imagination to conjure the emotional context of scenes they were performing without any of their scene partners physically present. A demand that placed genuinely unique creative pressure on voice performers unfamiliar with working in such an isolated recording environment. Despite this fragmented recording process, the film benefited enormously from small but memorable moments of behind-the-scenes humor and charm that have since become well known among fans of the production. One particularly amusing anecdote that has circulated widely among critics and audiences alike involves Alec Baldwin's deliberately thick Russian accent used to voice North, which he adopted to give the character a gruff, imposing, old-world warrior quality befitting his reinterpretation as a battle-hardened, tattoo-covered version of Santa Claus. Because of the specific way Baldwin pronounced Pitch Black's shortened first name throughout many of his lines using this heavy accent, several reviewers and audience members noted with amusement that the pronunciation occasionally sounded remarkably similar to an entirely different and far less family-friendly word, creating a genuinely funny, if presumably unintentional, moment of comic confusion for adult viewers who caught the resemblance during the film's more serious dialogue exchanges. This small linguistic quirk became something of a light-hearted talking point among critics writing about the film following its release, offering a reminder of how even serious, dramatically voiced animated performances can produce genuinely funny unintended moments once filtered through the ears of an attentive audience. Another engaging behind-the-scenes element of the production involved director Peter Ramsey's own personal journey throughout the making of the film, particularly regarding his historic role as the first African-American director to helm a major, big-budget computer-animated feature film. Ramsey has spoken about how this significant milestone did not fully register with him emotionally until relatively late in the production process, when his own parents happened to read a newspaper article highlighting this historic achievement just months before the film's completion. Ramsey has described how witnessing his parents' emotional reaction to this realization brought the full weight and meaning of his position back into focus for him personally, offering a genuinely touching glimpse into how even significant industry milestones can sometimes be easy for the person achieving them to overlook amid the day-to-day demands and pressures of actually completing a massive, technically complex production. This personal reflection adds a layer of behind-the-scenes humanity to a film otherwise dominated by discussions of budgets, visual effects pipelines, and box office performance, reminding audiences that significant cultural moments in filmmaking history often unfold quietly behind the scenes long before they are fully recognized publicly. The involvement of acclaimed filmmaker Guillermo del Toro as an executive producer on Rise of the Guardians also added a notably colorful creative presence to the film's development process, given del Toro's well-known personal passion for richly imaginative, fantastical storytelling and his reputation for bringing intense creative enthusiasm to any project he becomes involved with. Del Toro has spoken publicly about his genuine excitement working on the project alongside author William Joyce, whose original book series and accompanying short film concept provided the foundational mythology upon which the entire cinematic universe of Rise of the Guardians was built. The collaboration between Joyce's whimsical, illustration-driven source material and del Toro's darker, more gothic sensibilities as a storyteller helped shape the film's somewhat unusual tonal balance, blending light-hearted, child-friendly humor with genuinely unsettling, atmospheric horror elements surrounding Pitch Black and his nightmare creatures. A combination that set Rise of the Guardians apart from more uniformly cheerful entries in the broader landscape of family animated filmmaking. During that era, the film's overall production pipeline also required an enormous, coordinated effort across storyboarding, character modeling, rigging, environmental design, lighting, rendering, and final compositing stages, each representing a massive undertaking given the sheer number of entirely original characters and settings the story demanded compared to more conventional animated projects that might reuse established visual templates from earlier successful properties. The visual effects team in particular faced the challenging task of creating believable, unique textures and physical behaviors for an enormous range of different materials throughout the film, including realistic feather textures for Tooth's wings, the shifting golden particle textures used for Sandman's dream sand, the icy frost patterns constantly trailing behind Jack Frost's movements, and the shadowy, smoke-like nightmare creatures summoned by Pitch Black, each of which required entirely separate technical development processes to render convincingly across hundreds of individual shots throughout the finished film. Beyond character-based effects work, the production also required detailed rigging systems for background elements such as North's team of reindeer and his workshop full of small, chaotic elf characters, along with painterly, stylized water and river effects used during scenes involving Bunnymun's egg-dyeing rituals, reflecting just how much invisible technical labor went into creating even the film's smaller, seemingly incidental background details. Considering the sheer scale of financial and creative resources poured into Rise of the Guardians, the film's ultimately disappointing box office return relative to its high production cost has since become something of a notable case study within discussions of the broader economics of big-budget animated filmmaking. Industry analysts examining the film's underperformance in the years following its release have pointed to a combination of factors, including the challenge of trying to appeal broadly enough across differing age groups and audience expectations while simultaneously justifying such an enormous production budget, as well as the film's relatively late entry into an already crowded holiday season marketplace that year. facing direct competition from several other major studio releases performing strongly in theaters at the same time. Despite these commercial challenges, however, Rise of the Guardians has experienced something of a notable critical and cultural reappraisal in the years since its original theatrical release, with many now regarding it as one of the more genuinely ambitious, visually striking, and emotionally resonant entries in the broader DreamWorks Animation filmography. Even if its initial financial performance failed to match the studio's expectations at the time. Taken together, the story behind the making of Rise of the Guardians reflects a genuinely fascinating combination of enormous financial risk, groundbreaking technical innovation, and unusually starry and talented voice cast working largely in isolation from one another, and small, human moments of humor and personal reflection that occurred quietly behind the scenes throughout the production process. From Roger Deakins' unusual crossover into animated cinematography, to the studio's generous decision to share its OpenVDB technology freely with the wider industry, to Alec Baldwin's accidentally amusing accent work and Peter Ramsey's quietly emotional realization of his own historic significance as a director. The making of this film offers a richly layered example of just how much creative ambition, technical problem solving, and genuine human connection goes into producing a single major animated feature film, regardless of how that film ultimately performs at the box office. Rise of the Guardians occupies a fascinating cultural position within animated cinema history because it does something relatively few big-budget family films have ever attempted, weaving together several entirely separate strands of folklore, myth, and childhood tradition from wildly different historical and cultural origins into a single unified fictional universe. Rather than inventing a wholly original fantasy world from scratch, the film draws directly upon deeply rooted cultural figures that have existed independently across different countries and centuries, including Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, the Sandman, and the shadowy figure commonly known across many cultures as the Boogeyman, and asks audiences to imagine these seemingly unrelated childhood traditions as secretly connected members of a single ancient order working together behind the scenes of everyday life. This creative choice gives the film a genuinely unique cultural texture, since it essentially functions as a kind of unifying mythology for modern Western childhood, gathering together disparate folkloric threads that most people have never previously considered as belonging to the same narrative universe, and asking what it might mean if all of these beloved figures secretly knew one another and worked collectively toward a shared purpose. The foundation for this ambitious cultural project traces back to author and illustrator William Joyce, who spent an extraordinarily long period of time developing the ideas that would eventually become his book series titled The Guardians of Childhood, upon which Rise of the Guardians is based. Joyce has spoken about having worked on the underlying concepts behind this project for roughly 2 decades before the first book in the series was finally published in 2011. Reflecting just how much time and creative consideration went into figuring out how to meaningfully reimagine such deeply familiar cultural icons in a way that felt both respectful of their traditional roots and genuinely fresh for contemporary audiences. The first published book in Joyce's series centers on the origin story of the Man in the Moon, the mysterious silent figure who serves as the guiding, almost divine force behind the Guardians throughout the film, and this book introduces the broader concept that would structure the entire series. Namely, the idea that the moon itself is inhabited by a being who first created the Order of Guardians in response to the emergence of Pitch, described in Joyce's mythology as the ancient king of nightmares. Joyce's full literary vision for this series extended across multiple planned volumes exploring individual origin stories for each of the major Guardian figures, with names attached to future planned installments centering on the Sandman, the Tooth Fairy, and Jack Frost, in addition to the character Mother Goose, who does not appear prominently within the film adaptation itself but who is intended to hold a place within Joyce's broader literary mythology of childhood guardianship. Joyce's earlier body of work as a children's author and illustrator had already established him as a distinctive voice within the genre, having previously created other well-regarded picture books and an Emmy Award-winning animated series centered on a whimsical robotic child character, giving him a strong creative reputation within the children's literature world well before Rise of the Guardians brought his Guardians of Childhood concept to a mainstream global film audience. To fully appreciate the cultural significance of what Rise of the Guardians attempts, it becomes useful to consider the surprisingly rich and varied historical roots underlying each of the individual folkloric figures the film brings together under its unified guardian mythology. Santa Claus, the character reimagined in the film as the fierce, tattooed warrior figure known as North, traces his origins back to Saint Nicholas of Myra, a historical Christian bishop from the region now part of modern-day Turkey, who became associated over subsequent centuries with secret gift-giving and generosity toward children and the poor. Over time, this historical religious figure gradually merged with various European folk traditions surrounding winter gift-givers, eventually evolving through Dutch, German, and English cultural influences into the modern jolly, red-suited image of Santa Claus most familiar to contemporary audiences. A figure whose visual identity was further cemented throughout the 19th and 20th centuries through popular illustrations, advertising campaigns, and literature. The film's decision to reimagine this familiar figure as a burly, sword-wielding warrior with tattoos referencing naughty and nice children represents a deliberate creative choice to strip away centuries of softened, commercialized imagery and instead return to something closer to the older, more mythic and formidable folkloric roots underlying the gift-giving tradition. Presenting North as a figure whose gentleness toward children coexists with genuine physical strength and centuries of hard-won wisdom protecting the innocent from darker forces. The Tooth Fairy, portrayed in the film as the hummingbird-like Tooth commanding an army of tiny fairy helpers, actually represents one of the more culturally recent folkloric traditions among the guardians depicted in the story, with historians generally tracing the specific image of a tooth-collecting fairy back only to the early 20th century in its currently recognized form, making her considerably younger as an established cultural icon compared to figures like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, both of which carry folkloric roots stretching back many centuries earlier. Prior to this fairy-based tradition solidifying within American and broader English-speaking culture, many other societies around the world maintained entirely different rituals surrounding children's lost baby teeth, including widespread traditions across parts of Europe and elsewhere involving a small mouse who would visit sleeping children and exchange their lost teeth for a small gift or coin. A tradition still practiced today in certain Spanish-speaking countries under a specific mouse character name. Historical accounts also point toward much older traditions among Norse societies, where warriors reportedly valued children's baby teeth enough to carry them into battle as tokens believed to bring good fortune, illustrating just how differently various cultures throughout history have approached the seemingly small, universal childhood milestone of losing one's first teeth. The eventual shift from tooth-collecting mice toward a fairy-based mythology appears to have gained significant momentum throughout the mid-20th century, aided considerably by the broader popularization of whimsical fairy imagery within American popular culture during that era, eventually solidifying into the widely recognized tooth fairy figure most familiar to audiences watching Rise of the Guardians today. The Easter Bunny, reimagined in the film as the fierce, battle-ready warrior rabbit known as Bunnymund, carries folkloric roots that trace back primarily to German cultural traditions, where an egg-bearing hare figure known historically as the Osterhase became associated with springtime and Easter celebrations, drawing upon much older pre-Christian associations between rabbits, fertility, and the arrival of spring following the long darkness of winter. This tradition eventually made its way to America through German immigrant communities during the 18th century, gradually spreading and evolving into the broader American Easter Bunny tradition recognized today, complete with associated customs surrounding decorated eggs, springtime baskets, and gift-giving for children during the Easter holiday season. The film's portrayal of Bunnymund as a towering, muscular warrior figure obsessed with tradition, precision, An ancient ritual represents a particularly dramatic creative departure from the softer, more whimsical image typically associated with the Easter Bunny in most contemporary depictions. Instead, framing the character as a fiercely proud guardian whose entire identity and self-worth become deeply tied to the successful completion of his elaborate yearly Easter preparations, a reimagining that adds genuine emotional weight to the story's midpoint crisis when Pitch Black successfully sabotages an entire year's worth of Bunnyman's painstaking work. Sandman, the silent golden figure responsible for delivering pleasant dreams to children each night through his distinctive golden dream sand, draws upon folkloric traditions found across multiple European cultures involving a mythical figure who sprinkles sand or dust into children's eyes to induce sleep. A tradition perhaps most famously explored within a well-known and considerably darker 19th-century German literary work that reimagined the Sandman figure as a considerably more sinister and frightening presence than the gentle, benevolent character depicted within Rise of the Guardians. The film's choice to render Sandman as an entirely silent character, communicating exclusively through playful, ever-shifting images formed from his golden sand rather than spoken dialogue, represents a particularly inventive creative decision that sets him apart visually and narratively from every other major character in the story. And this silence paradoxically makes Sandman one of the most emotionally affecting and beloved characters within the film despite his complete lack of spoken lines throughout its entire runtime. Perhaps the most culturally significant reimagining within the entire film involves its central antagonist, Pitch Black, who draws directly upon the universal childhood archetype commonly referred to across countless different cultures and languages as the boogeyman, a figure representing generalized childhood fear of darkness, the unknown, and nighttime anxiety that appears in strikingly similar forms across an enormous range of different societies throughout human history, despite these various cultural traditions having developed largely independently from one another. This widespread cross-cultural consistency surrounding some version of a shadowy, fear-inducing childhood figure suggests something genuinely universal about human psychological development, reflecting a shared aspect of childhood experience that transcends specific cultural or historical boundaries in a way relatively few other folkloric figures manage to achieve. The film's decision to position Pitch Black as a tragic, complex antagonist whose villainy stems from centuries spent being feared, hated, and ultimately forgotten by the very children whose fear once gave him power, rather than simply depicting him as a straightforwardly evil force, adds considerable emotional and thematic depth to the story, drawing an intentional parallel between Pitch's loneliness and Jack Frost's own centuries of isolation, suggesting that fear and wonder may ultimately stem from strikingly similar emotional roots within the human experience of childhood. Jack Frost himself, the character around whom the film's central emotional arc revolves, represents yet another distinctive folkloric tradition, with roots tracing back through English and broader European folklore as a personification of wintry weather, frost patterns, and the seasonal transition into cold months, a tradition that similarly appears in various forms across Russian, Nordic, and other European winter folklore traditions featuring their own distinct personifications of winter's arrival. Unlike Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, or the Easter Bunny, Jack Frost has historically existed as a somewhat looser, more poetic personification of a natural seasonal phenomenon rather than a figure associated with any specific ritual, gift-giving practice, or clearly defined visual iconography, which arguably gave William Joyce and the film's creative team considerably more creative freedom in shaping his backstory, personality, and visual design compared to the other Guardian characters, whose established cultural associations were considerably more rigid and widely recognized among audiences before the film's release. Beyond simply drawing upon these individually rich folkloric traditions, Rise of the Guardians makes a broader cultural statement through its central thematic premise that the power and continued existence of each Guardian figure depends directly upon children's continued belief in them. A narrative device that transforms what might otherwise be treated as simple children's mythology into a more philosophically resonant meditation on the nature of belief itself, and what may be lost as children gradually grow older and stop believing in the magical figures that once defined their earliest understanding of wonder and hope. This thematic emphasis situates the film within a broader tradition of family entertainment exploring the bittersweet transition from childhood innocence toward more skeptical adult understanding, while simultaneously suggesting that certain forms of belief, hope, and wonder retain genuine value and power even as literal childhood belief in figures like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy naturally fades with age. It is worth noting that some cultural commentary and academic analysis examining Rise of the Guardians in the years following its release has raised thoughtful questions regarding the film's somewhat narrow, primarily Western and specifically American-centered approach to constructing its unified mythology of childhood belief. Critics engaging with this angle have pointed out that despite the film briefly depicting the Guardians operating across various global locations, the specific mythological figures chosen to anchor its story remain rooted almost entirely within American and broader Western European folkloric traditions, potentially overlooking the rich diversity of entirely different childhood folklore figures maintained by other cultures around the world who might traditionally fulfill similar symbolic roles. Surrounding gift-giving, seasonal renewal, dream protection, or childhood fear within their own distinct cultural contexts. This observation does not necessarily diminish the film's genuine creative achievement in weaving together its chosen folkloric elements into a coherent, emotionally resonant narrative, but it does offer a useful lens for understanding the film's cultural project as being somewhat culturally specific in scope, reflecting a particular Western vision of childhood mythology rather than a truly universal one. An observation that adds interesting nuance to broader academic discussions surrounding how modern commercial media sometimes selectively adapts and commercializes folklore traditions drawn from specific cultural lineages while presenting them as broadly universal experiences. The involvement of Guillermo del Toro as an executive producer on the project adds another intriguing layer of cultural context to Rise of the Guardians, given del Toro's own well-established career-long fascination with monsters, darkness, childhood fear, and the thin boundary separating wonder from terror across his broader body of celebrated filmmaking work. Del Toro's creative sensibilities, generally associated with richly atmospheric, sometimes genuinely frightening explorations of fantastical themes, brought a distinctive tonal influence to Rise of the Guardians that helps explain why the film, despite ultimately being aimed at family audiences, contains genuinely unsettling visual and narrative elements surrounding Pitch Black and his shadowy nightmare creatures that push the boundaries of typical family animated filmmaking conventions somewhat further than many of its more uniformly cheerful animated contemporaries released around the same period. This willingness to embrace genuine darkness and emotional complexity alongside more traditionally light-hearted animated comedy represents one of the more culturally distinctive aspects of the film's overall creative identity, positioning it as a somewhat unusual hybrid within the broader landscape of early 2010s family animated cinema. From an awards and critical recognition standpoint, Rise of the Guardians achieved a degree of industry acknowledgement that reflected its genuine artistic ambitions, earning a nomination for the Golden Globe Award for Best Animated Feature Film as well as a nomination for the Annie Award for Best Animated Feature, an award specifically dedicated to recognizing excellence within the animation industry and often considered a particularly meaningful form of peer recognition among animation professionals themselves. While the film ultimately did not win either of these prestigious nominations, its recognition within these award contexts reflected broader critical appreciation for its visual ambition, emotional storytelling, and technical animation achievements. Even as its underwhelming box office performance relative to its substantial production budget somewhat overshadowed this critical acclaim within broader popular discourse surrounding the film at the time of its theatrical release. In the years following its initial theatrical run, Rise of the Guardians has experienced a notable and increasingly appreciative critical and cultural reassessment among both professional critics and general audiences, with many now regarding it as an underappreciated gem within the broader DreamWorks Animation filmography. And some commentators going so far as to argue that it represents one of the studio's most genuinely ambitious and emotionally sophisticated storytelling achievements. Despite its disappointing initial commercial reception, this gradual critical reappraisal reflects a fairly common pattern within film culture more broadly, wherein financially underperforming films sometimes go on to develop passionate, dedicated fanbases and stronger critical reputations many years after their original theatrical release, once initial box office disappointment no longer colors popular perception of the work itself. Rise of the Guardians has increasingly been cited by fans and animation enthusiasts alike as a film whose creative ambitions, emotional depth, and technical craftsmanship were perhaps somewhat undervalued during its initial release window, particularly given how thoughtfully it approaches deeper thematic territory surrounding loneliness, identity, sacrifice, and the value of belief compared to many of its more straightforwardly comedic animated contemporaries from the same era. Taken as a whole, the cultural and historical significance of Rise of the Guardians lies in its genuinely ambitious attempt to synthesize an unusually wide range of distinct, historically rooted folkloric traditions into a single coherent narrative universe, drawing upon centuries of evolving cultural mythology surrounding Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, the Sandman, and universal childhood fears embodied within the boogeyman archetype, while simultaneously using this rich, folkloric foundation to explore genuinely resonant thematic territory surrounding belief, identity, and the bittersweet transition from childhood wonder toward more skeptical adult understanding of the world. Though the film's specific cultural framing has invited thoughtful critical discussion regarding its primarily Western orientation, and though its ambitious production budget ultimately outpaced its commercial box office return, Rise of the Guardians remains a genuinely fascinating cultural artifact precisely because of how directly and creatively it engages with such deeply rooted, historically layered folkloric traditions, offering audiences a uniquely unified vision of childhood mythology that continues to resonate with growing appreciation among fans and critics many years after its initial theatrical release. If you have enjoyed this deep exploration into the cultural roots and historical folklore behind Rise of the Guardians, please take a moment to like this video, share it with fellow fans who love uncovering the deeper stories behind their favorite films, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next full breakdown of the movies you love. Body of work built during his formative years in the entertainment industry.